You're listening to the University of Sioux Falls Campus Ministries podcast.
Hi everyone, my name's Matt Stiles and I serve as the campus pastor at the University of Sioux Falls. On this podcast, we have conversations with USF staff, alumni, students, and experts in the community to help us better integrate the Christian faith into our particular field. Our focus this semester will be psychology and spiritual formation. Well, welcome to the Campus Ministries podcast. Today on the podcast, we welcome Melissa Hiatt. Melissa currently serves as Director of Women's Leadership Programming at EmBe. She also has served as a hospital chaplain, a pastor, and has her own business called Levav Leadership Consulting. This business facilitates courageous cultures by paying attention to the inner life of leaders. And beyond all of this, Melissa has been a friend of our family, and I've just appreciated her leadership and her wisdom. So Melissa, thanks for being a part of the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. And I'll say that I echo the appreciation. Matt was my pastor for 7 years and just really appreciated your leadership. And I'm so glad you're at my alma mater.
Well, thank you. So this semester, we're discussing the theme of psychology and spiritual formation, and we're sharing helpful insights about how to grow in both. And so your experience, both in Levav and what you do at EmBe and as a chaplain, plus your experience as a pastor and as a follower of Jesus is just so helpful. So I'd love to talk more about some of the ways that psychology and spiritual formation intersect in your work.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things that we've talked about on various occasions, and you do such a great job of explaining, is the power of shame in our life and how shame can form us and some better alternatives to shame. So could you share a little bit more about your work with shame?
Yeah, so I have a master's in marriage and family therapy, but I was never licensed as a therapist because I really hated individual therapy. But I love systems thinking. And so when I started working at the church, I did a lot of the pastoral care because of my background. And so I would always call myself a brief therapist. I didn't want to go into like all the old past things. But if you were having problems with your 16-year-old son or your marriage was struggling, that kind of thing, I could meet and then help refer on. And so because I have my background in marriage and family therapy, it teaches you to be a systems thinker. And so when I was working at the church, I would have people come in, and it could be about anything, and I would just ask questions to try to understand what was happening. So, somebody's coming in every week for a $50 gift card to Hy-Vee because they can't make it through their week. And I'm thinking, God, are we helping the system or hurting the system? Is this helpful or are we harming? And so I would just ask questions. Hey, what's going on? Oh, glad to see you again, whatever. Or whatever, whoever I was meeting with. And the theme that kept coming up as I was meeting with people is the idea that there were a lot of secrets that people were carrying. And so just in asking questions, people would say things like, I've never told anyone that. And I began to see the power that secrets had in people's lives. And it seemed to keep them small and afraid. And as soon as they shared the secret, I saw this relief. I saw this, and sometimes the secrets felt really big to them. But to me, I was like, oh yeah, me too. Or yeah, nothing was like shocking, but people were carrying these secrets that had such weight. So I was so concerned about it that I went home to my kids at the time, who were 5 and 7, Joseph and Lily. And it was before bedtime, and I just was like, you guys, there's good secrets and bad secrets. And good secrets are like, shh, it's Daddy's birthday next week. Don't tell him what we bought him. But a bad secret would be like, if there was anything you ever did that you thought, if Mom and Dad knew this about me, they wouldn't love me anymore. That is a bad secret. You need to get that out. Don't let that stay inside of you. And in spiritual terms, I think I even said to them, that's Satan's way of keeping you afraid. And so there is nothing you could ever do that would make Mom and Dad not love you anymore. And if you can't tell us, then tell Aunt Emily or tell Grandma or tell somebody, but don't keep that inside. And so I was so concerned about secrets and what they were doing to people that I just started to, in my practice, ask people, is there anything you're not telling me? Just to See, and then I came upon Brene Brown's work, and Brene Brown talks about shame. And everything she was saying about shame was what I was experiencing in my experience with people, and even in myself. And it was funny because when I first started reading it, I thought, I don't have shame. I came from a really supportive family, parents that loved me, parents that told me they believed in me. But shame is sneaky. And so this is what I've learned about shame. And it's a belief that there's something wrong with us. And if anybody knew, they wouldn't love us anymore. And it starts out as the smallest little whisper of doubt. And then our brains look for all the ways we can to confirm it. I'm not good enough. And then somebody's look as they pass by me might confirm, oh, see, I knew they didn't like me. I'm not good enough. I don't fit in here. And so shame is really this belief that there's something wrong with us and that we are not worthy of love and belonging. And so when I think about Christianity in my practice, I think I grew up believing that sin was missing the mark. I'm beginning to believe that sin is forgetting that we are beloved.
I think of one particular story where Jesus is invited to the home of a religious leader. And this religious leader is probably checking out Jesus to see, like, is this guy a legitimate rabbi or not? And so he's feeling him out. And in the middle of this conversation, as they're dining together, a woman comes in and begins to wipe Jesus' feet. The thought from the religious leader is, if he only knew what kind of woman she was, he would not let her do this. And Jesus then turns it and says, who do you think would love someone more? Is it somebody who has like a little bit forgiven or somebody who has a lot forgiven? And the person says, I suppose the person with a lot forgiven would love more. And he says, yeah, that's right. And since the moment I've walked in here, you haven't offered to clean my feet. You haven't done anything. And yet this woman has come in and she's bringing her brokenness, and Jesus actually welcomes that in. And I think that we have a God who actually invites us to come with our brokenness.
Right.
And these conceptions of God, too, where it's like, well, if he knows my brokenness, then he's going to move away from me. But we see throughout the biblical witness is this God coming towards a sinful people, constantly moving towards them.
Right. And that goes along with the research that Brene was doing around shame. Is she says shame can't grow with words wrapped around it. So the practice of confession is really important. Having a place to name those things about yourself, to bring them out into the light. Shame grows with secrecy, silence, and judgment. And so the thing that stops shame in its tracks is empathy. And so what did Jesus do? Provided empathy, was able to take the perspective of that woman, knowing that she comes broken, and loving her.
I think it kind of gets to the idea of what motivates people. And we tend to often see shame not only as something that we just hold on to, but sometimes we value it because we think it actually accomplishes something. And then I think oftentimes are baffled when it does the reverse. And so then we feel like when it doesn't go the way we think it should, we need to double down on shame.
Right. And it's counterintuitive. It's not helpful. It doesn't get you the results that you want when you double down on shame. And so there's research done with fifth graders who are more shame prone and more guilt prone to talk. Shame talk versus guilt talk. Those that had shame talk, I am bad, were more prone to be in jail, have addiction, have all, because it's hard to change bad. Those that were able to talk about behavior, I did something bad, were able to make choices to do something different. So like when I've worked with organizations, this is why sometimes I feel like I get to do more ministry now within organizations than I ever got to do in the church sometimes. And I had a director call and say, could you come work with my team? They're toxic. And he just started going on and on and on about how toxic his team was. And I said, I would love to come and work with your team, but the first thing I need from you is to stop calling them toxic. It's hard to change toxic. But I'd rather you talk about what are the behaviors that you're seeing that are toxic, because we can change toxic behaviors. We can't change toxic teams. So it's defeating to use shame talk. So learning, just at a simple level of, oh, I'm bad, no, I did something bad. And working with kids, that's bad. That, never saying that they're bad, but just pointing out, you know what, when you hit your friend, that was bad. We could choose to do something different. And spiritually, then, it's hard to receive God's love when I'm bad. So shame does not help us get closer to God. Guilt can lead to a difference. We can focus on the behaviors that I'm doing that might separate me from God, and I can change those behaviors.
And thinking of how shame malforms us because it skews our views of other people, of ourselves. It also leads to not only a secrecy of a few things, but it creates a culture of secrecy, of constantly, I just need to keep everything under the table. And that actually leads to a devolving of communal presence. What's the alternative? Like you mentioned empathy. Are there other things that are helpful? I know you've talked about vulnerability too. How might vulnerability or other things help us lead in a different way and even just hold a different posture?
Yeah, so when I was pastoring at the church, I had the fortune of being able to lead people through the journey with Vantage Point 3. And it asks 3 questions: who am I, who is God, and what does God want to do through me? And on the who am I part, we would do a timeline. And so I got to lead probably 5 different groups through this process. And the timeline has you just think of all the critical incidents in your life. Moved from Louisville to Omaha. My grandfather died. Just putting all of that on a timeline. And then you're encouraged to take all of the negative ones and write them on a pink sticky note. So now you have this timeline of yellow sticky notes with pockets of pink sticky notes. And I was the pastor, associate pastor, and I would help oversee discipleship, community, and leadership. So with discipleship, I'm trying to help people grow. And I kept seeing these pink sticky notes because after you put all the yellow sticky notes and the pink sticky notes on the timeline, you start to divide up your life into like 4 chapters. And I noticed that people's next chapter usually started after a pretty significant pink sticky note. And these were times of growth usually. These are times of change. And I looked at that after working with 5 different groups of people and looking at that pink sticky note and not liking the pink sticky notes, wishing that the pink sticky notes didn't happen to people. And I thought, oh my gosh, why do we have to wait for crappy things to happen in order for people to grow? Because the pink sticky notes seemed like these places where growth was launched. Something new came out of this really hard thing. So I started to research the pink sticky notes, and I started to just identify them as moments of chaos. They were moments of chaos. They didn't know they were coming. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know where they were going. And it honestly, in a spiritual way, made them rely on God more. And so I started to go, man, could we enter into voluntary chaos? Is that possible? What would that look like? What if I entered into moments where I didn't know what was next? Where I wasn't in control, where the answer wasn't clear. And so the last year I was at the church, I call it my year of holy discontentment. I knew God was leading me somewhere. I didn't know what it was, but I entered into some moments of voluntary chaos. And it became clear to me that it was time for me to move on to what was next. So when I started reading Brené's work, just like when I started reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, shame, this is what I experienced. When I started to read about vulnerability, I'm like, oh my gosh, these are the pink sticky notes. And she says that vulnerability is the feeling that you get when there's risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And that's how I would identify those pink sticky notes. There was risk, there was uncertainty, and there were lots of emotions. And so I just started to put that into a spiritual practice of vulnerability is a spiritual practice. When we are willing to be vulnerable, when we are willing to know that life is uncertain, it opens us up to relying on God more. Otherwise, we're like holding on tight and thinking we can control everything. And why do we even need God when we can control everything? But the fact is, life is vulnerable. And when life is vulnerable, we can either slide into shame of, I'm not good enough, I should have seen this coming, I should have been more prepared, I should have prayed more. Or we can open ourselves up and say, okay, God, this is my prayer now for vulnerability is there's usually a gap between where I am and where I want to be. Or there's a gap between where a relationship is and where I want the relationship to be. And old Melissa would have tried to perfect it and try harder and fix it. Now I say, Holy Spirit, work in the in between where I am and where I want to be. And I just think it's a spiritual practice.
I feel like that understanding of vulnerability is an openness to God, an openness also to not have to control everything.
Yeah.
And when I first heard the word vulnerability, I thought of it as like, just say everything.
Yeah.
You know, like, or just like anything that has happened, just spill it. Versus what you're talking about is this space of liminality. We don't have control of the situation. We don't have all the answers. We step out and open ourselves up to both God and other people.
Yeah.
Which even thinking of sometimes our theology around how we operate with God, sometimes I think we have this picture of God where he was involved during the times of the Bible, and then I'll have a phrase sometimes I use that God dropped a book off and took off, and so it's just like, hey, here's the book, and then God retreats, and then we'll come back. But the problem is that's not the witness of the Bible, that Jesus talks about, I will be with you to the very end of the age. He promises to send his Spirit to not leave us as orphans. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That Jesus seems to always be present and at work. And not just, and I think the other way we kind of tweak it is we might be like, well, yeah, we believe Jesus is present and at work, provided we can get control enough for him to work.
Right.
Versus the reverse of that Jesus is actually doing things. God is present and at work. And so my posture is not to get things done for God, but to discern what God is up to and to reach out and start asking questions to figure out, like, well, what is God doing in this situation? And that way I don't have to manipulate and control others or situations. I can actually have a trust that God is doing something, even when I don't know what it is right away.
Right. I think it was Anne Lamott that says the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. And so that's part of how I've understood faith now is faith for me is a guiding principle. It's a guiding value that I have, but it means believing in things I cannot see. So when I'm experiencing risk and uncertainty, it's my faith that goes, oh, I can't see it all. I don't know how this is working, but I believe God is for me. And so I can live in this uncertainty for a while. And when you're talking about vulnerability is sharing everything, I have come to understand, because that was my go-to, is if I just explained it all, then people would understand. And so I probably did overshare. But it wasn't vulnerability. It was me, almost manipulation. I think oversharing can be manipulation, because if you understood everything, then you would respond the way I want you and need you to respond. And so a practice for me now has been, it's okay for me to be misunderstood. And then sitting in the vulnerability of that. Otherwise, I'm oversharing, sharing more than people have the right to hear. Can I even trust people with this story? So yeah, vulnerability is not oversharing.
So when we lead, we can lead out of a place of shame or out of a place of vulnerability. And not just when we lead, we can just live life out of a place of shame or lack of vulnerability. But you also discovered some of the work of Pete Scazzero during your pastoral ministry and just being emotionally healthy. How does being emotionally healthy help? What does it look like? And what tools could be helpful for us seeking to be emotionally healthy?
The way that I describe emotional health is understanding what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what you're doing, and how they're all three connected. And so feeling even means like not just the emotion, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling vulnerable, but my throat is tightening up, my heart is racing, my stomach is churning. What is your body telling you? So when I did clinical pastoral education, the training that you have to do for chaplaincy, one of the questions, there was so much writing and so many questions in that learning, but one of the questions was, how do you use your sense of self? And I remember going, well, I use my feet to walk, my ears to hear, my mouth to talk, my eyes to see, yeah. And then my supervisor said, but Melissa, how do you know if you stay in the room? How do you know if you ask another question? How do you know if you stay quiet, whatever? And I was like, oh, sometimes there's a hum in me where I just know I'm onto something, like the Spirit's at work, like this is a moment, and there's just this hum. And so it's been fun to teach this, not only when you're feeling terrible things, like pay attention to what this feels like in your body. But when you're on to something, when you're doing like, this is what I was made for, what does that feel like in your body? And so learning to connect the feeling, the thinking, and the doing is the way that we get the most emotionally healthy. So I always like to coach people in that. Like, when was the last time like everything was going great? You were right where you were supposed to be. What did that feel like in your body? And for me, that has helped me tap into my intuition. That has helped me tap into my trusting faith. Like, this is when I know God's at work here. Like, this is holy ground. Pay attention to this. The thinking part is so fascinating because you would think that we would know what we're thinking, but it's usually so far out of our consciousness that we haven't really paid attention to it. And so learning to pay attention to the stories we make up. So we are meaning-making machines. When we're in struggle, we make up stories to try to understand it. And then our bodies reward us for those stories, whether they're true or not. And so in my work with people, I find most of us are operating out of stories that aren't true. And I mean, we can make up crazy stories. I always tell the story of my husband I've been married to him for 32 years. He always shows up for me. There was a week where I was leading Dare to Lead classes, and I was like, hey, Tim, I'm going to need your help in a couple weeks on this. And he's like, okay. We get to the week of the event, and I said, hey, I'm going to need your help on Tuesday and Wednesday. And he was standing in the middle of the living room with his arms crossed looking up at the ceiling. And my immediate go-to was, I'm annoying him. He didn't know how much I was going to ask of him. I'm asking too much of him. He's mad. Making up the craziest stories about him. And so finally I just stopped and I said, hey, Tim, the story I'm telling myself is that this is way more than you signed up for, and you don't have time for all of this, but I'm sorry, I need your help the next 2 days. I can't get through it without you. And not only that, I need you to be happy about helping me. And so he looked at me and he was like, what? I was just thinking through my next 2 days. That's fine. I was just thinking through my calendar. I can be there. And I'm like, oh, you're not mad at me? He's like, no. I'm like, oh, okay. But that's the thing. Like, I've been married to this man for 32 years who always shows up for me. But in that moment, I was hooked. And I was like, he's mad at me. That's my go-to. I'm annoying people. I'm asking too much. So I tend to be hyper independent, and it's hard for me to ask for help. Even of my husband, who loves me and always shows up for me. I made up a crappy story about him. So that's what we have to start learning to pay attention to, is what is the story we're telling ourselves, and learning not to act out of it. Pay attention to it. Check it. Is it true? Is it not true? There's usually way more assumptions than there are facts. And then the last part is, what am I doing? And just noticing our patterns of what we do when we're feeling any of these things. So my pattern is usually to talk it to death with anybody who will listen to it. Sometimes, it's okay. I'm a verbal processor, but I don't need to talk about something with 12 people. I can talk about it with 1 or 2 close people to help give me some insight. But yeah, those are patterns I had to learn that weren't helpful anywhere. In my family, in the church, in my work, that just spreads anxiety and discontent. And so I needed to learn how to manage that.
I feel like the assumption sometimes is, when we step into roles of leadership, whatever they look like, whether they're formal or informal, we just think, as long as I'm doing well. And like, the more I'm doing, I must be doing even better. Versus, no, how am I doing what I'm doing? What's motivating me? What are those stories that I'm telling? What's driving me? What's driving my relationships? And if we don't pay attention to that, we can tell ourselves we're doing things for God, and we can even genuinely be wanting to do things for God, but we're doing things for God like the rest of the world. And I think this invitation out of shame into a vulnerability with God and also with one another actually serves as an alternative way in the world that is much more healthy and relates to one another in a way that brings life. Well, I appreciate your just taking some time to share these insights and your wisdom. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. I'm so glad you're here at USF.